All right. Welcome, Jesse. And I also wanted to introduce Marianne Johnson, who is our Madison area coordinator. Both are in person at the facility in Madison. So I will let Jesse take it away.
Thank you, Ashley. All right. A little bit complicated with doing it virtually and in person. I'm so happy we're able to do it. So I think we've got it figured out. Thank you for being here to those on Zoom. Thank you for those that are here in person. Like Ashley said, I am with Agrace, and specifically I'm with our Agrace Grief Support Center, which is a standalone grief center in Fitchburg, right outside Madison. So I'm going to just share a little bit about our work here, and I'm also going to talk about grief in general. I do have a short video tour of our grief center for those who are joining us virtually, and then those that are in person, you'll get to see it in person, of course. So that's the game plan for today. If there are questions along the way, please just jump in. For those in the room, please just jump in with a question. I'll repeat it to make sure that those via Zoom can hear the question, or if there's questions on chat, I'm sure between me and Ashley will catch those and be able to respond. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and make sure that I share sound, right? We always have to make sure we do that. All right. Oh, technology. Oh no, now I'm frozen. Let's see if I can you hear me?
I can hear you and I can see you, and it looks like you've taken over. It just maybe is loading your thing.
Okay.
Presentation maybe.
Okay. I'll give it a second.
Yeah, otherwise maybe.
Oh,
there we go.
Oh gosh. Okay, here we go. Try again. Take two. So one of the things about Agrace that's unique is that we provide grief support to anyone that's grieving a death, even if the person that passed away was not served by our hospice. That's not something that we're required to do, but feel like it's the right thing to do to provide grief support to everyone in the community. So that's a little bit unique about Agrace. We have several different service lines. I think our hospice is probably what we're most known for. But we also have an adult day center that opened about 2 years ago in Madison. We have Age at Home, which is a program for folks that need some extra support in their home. We also have the Grief Center, of course, which we're going to be focusing on today. We have palliative care, which we call supportive care. So that's another service that Agrace provides. We have our own DME program for hospice patients. So there's a good question. DME is durable medical equipment. So for folks that need like hospital beds or commodes, things like that in their homes, we have our own internal department that fulfills those needs. So a lot of different services that Agrace provides. And as I mentioned, the Grief Support Center, so we opened this space about 6 years ago. Agrace has always provided grief support. But we realized that we needed a standalone space for a few reasons. So some of you might be familiar, we have an inpatient unit just down the road in Fitchburg that has an inpatient unit for hospice patients that need end-of-life care or symptom management. We also have a memory care portion for folks that are on hospice with memory issues. And then we also have an inpatient unit in Janesville. But for those local people in the Madison area, it can be a barrier to go to our inpatient unit to receive grief support. Even if the person that died in their life wasn't in that building, just knowing that that's what happens there can be a barrier for folks. So we wanted to take that barrier away. We also wanted better space for people that were grieving. So our building over there is beautiful, but it wasn't necessarily designed for grief support. We didn't have a lot of rooms for adult groups. We certainly didn't have space for kids. And so for those reasons, we wanted to open a grief center. So most of this building is actually dedicated to kids and their needs when they're grieving. Like I said, we have the video tour, and then those here will see the space. The other thing about this space is that having a separate space, the resources, the staff, all of that goes into maintaining this space also sends a message that grief is important and grief is valid, and so much so that we created this space for folks. So we're really proud of it. And like I've mentioned before, we'll support anybody grieving a death. We do that through individual support. We also have support groups for adults, and we have a family program for kids and their primary caregivers to come receive support. We do education like this. We also do provide resources. We'll go into businesses or a school if there was a death of a staff member or a student or an employee. We can go in and offer support. So lots of different options there as well. So today we're going to be focusing on grief. I'm going to talk about the basics of grief, how it shows up in people's lives, how you can support someone who's grieving, things that you can say, maybe things that you might want to think twice about before saying. So we'll dive right in here. All right. So just to sort of lay the foundation for grief. Grief is experienced for all sorts of things, not just a death, of course. But it's those feelings and reactions that we experience as we anticipate a change or a loss, right? We grieve before something happens or before someone dies, and we grieve after that as well. And so while this presentation is going to focus specifically on grief from a death, it can be extrapolated to lots of different reasons that we grieve, right? We can grieve for a move, a change in employment, in schools, in childcare situations, relationships changing, changes in our physical health and our emotional health. We grieve for those reasons, incarceration, deportation, all sorts of different reasons. So while we're aware of that, and I'm not going to mention these things specifically going forward, it certainly can apply to those situations as well. I think one of the biggest misnomers about grief is that there's stages, right? Like you might hear people saying like, oh, I'm in the anger stage or in denial. And there are, I'm sure most everybody has heard of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, right? So her work was with people at the end of their lives. And through the years, that got transitioned to these 5 grief stages that survivors feel after the death. And that's not what she meant. That's not how they were intended to be used. But unfortunately, it's become very well known, and a lot of people refer to it. And what ends up happening then is people think there's a linear expectation of grief, right? We think that you do this and you feel this way and you do this, and then, oh, look, yay, it's over and I'm better. And for lots of reasons that can cause issues, but that's not how grief works. There's no end to it, and it doesn't happen in a linear stage-like fashion. Grief takes more energy than I think most people realize. And in grief, we talk a lot about like having to put on a mask, right? To go to work, to go to school, to do the things that you have to do in life. And putting on that mask and pretending you're okay when you're not takes an enormous amount of energy. And so we hear a lot about fatigue and weakness and just feeling tired all the time. That's definitely part of grief. Grief also changes and evolves over time. This is particularly true for children as they reach different developmental stages, right? A 5-year-old who experiences something is going to express that grief and understand that grief differently than when he's 10 or 15. And so sometimes we hear from folks and they'll say, you know, gosh, my 8-year-old, I don't know, there's their behavior is changing. They're asking different questions about their person, you know, but their person died when they were 2 and they're not sure if it's connected. A lot of times it is because now they understand that loss differently. So definitely something to keep in mind. Grief shows up in every part of our lives. There isn't a corner of our life that isn't impacted by that. It can also remind us of past losses. So the death of my father 2 years ago reminded me of the death of my stepmom 6 years ago, right? So sometimes we hear from people like, gosh, you know, my grandpa died, but I keep thinking about my dad who died when I was a kid. It's a similar experience, right? Similar feelings, reminds us of past experiences. So very common, but can feel abnormal to someone if they don't know that that's a typical reaction. Grief doesn't just mean we're grieving the loss of a person, right? It's the loss of future plans. It's the loss of maybe reconnecting with a relationship that was struggling. It's those hopes and dreams, the options to make it better, to make it different. It's those intangible things, right? It's not necessarily missing like eating dinner with the person, but it's like, oh, we were going to take this trip or we were going to, you know, do this project together. So all of that is part of grief. And I think all of this is summed up by it's more complex than people may realize. So any thoughts or questions on this so far? So here's the slide that's just showing, you know, of course, the slide could have many more words on it, but grief shows up in lots of different ways, and it's different for different people, of course. But some of the main ones that we hear and see are fear and worry. So this can also show up big time in kids who are grieving, particularly if a primary caregiver has died. So worrying about their other adults dying, even worrying about themselves dying. And so then that can lead to what's wrong with me that I'm thinking about death all the time and not wanting to talk about that with other people because they don't want to worry other people. They don't want to be seen as, you know, weird or that there's something wrong with them. But fear and worry are huge. Sleep disruptions, very common. And this makes a lot of sense. Usually when we're trying to go to sleep, that's when we don't have our devices, we don't have those distractions. So that's when our mind starts spinning, right? So very common to have issues falling asleep, irritable, being impatient, depression, physical symptoms. My gosh, the physical symptoms of grief are really a very long list, but some of the big ones, stomach aches, headaches, particularly for kids. They can complain of these things, their grief impacting them physically. Fatigue, we've talked about, appetite changes, substance use or abuse, restlessness, absent-mindedness. People often talk about, I start a project and I can't finish it, or I forget where I put things, lack of concentration and focus, all very common. And again, contributes to this feeling of feeling like they're not doing it right, because we don't talk about these things. We don't talk about all of these common grief experiences. So how do we show support and care? What are the ways that we can connect with people? What are the ways that what can we do, right? We often want to do something to help. So what are the ways that we can do that? Before we talk about that, I think it's important to hear about what we hear from people as far as their fears regarding society in general. So people fear their person being forgotten. They fear feeling like a burden, right? They don't want to ask for help because they don't want to put anybody out. So they just don't ask for help at all. They fear important days not being acknowledged, birthdays, anniversaries, anniversary of the death, things like that. Being asked, how are you? Kind of the snide thought that we have in our head when we're grieving is, oh, do you really want to know how I'm doing? And so we'll talk about what to say instead. But, when we say, how are you to someone, we don't know as a griever, we don't know if you're really interested in the truth or if you want us to say like, doing fine, thanks. And that doesn't feel genuine, right? Running into people who don't know. Running into someone in the grocery store who asks you how your dad's doing, and they don't know that he, died a few weeks ago. So that's a fear that people have. And then finally, assumptions about the relationship, right? We are all human. None of us have perfect relationships with anybody in our lives. And so when we assume that someone is grieving the death of somebody that was a healthy relationship, that was a safe relationship, that's not always the case, right? So again, we'll talk about how you can ask instead, but don't make assumptions about the quality of someone's relationship. Okay, so as a general rule, and of course there are always exceptions, what we recommend not saying to grieving people. They wouldn't want you to be sad, okay? So what that says to somebody is that their emotions aren't okay. And now you're saying that the person that they're grieving wouldn't want them to feel that way. Probably not the best thing to say. Religious themed statements, unless you know the person's belief or they have told you what they believe, it's best to avoid that, right? So saying things like God has a bigger plan, God needed them more. Again, that might be very comforting for some people, but you might also really offend somebody. So unless you know for sure, it's just best to avoid statements like that. Everything happens for a reason. Again, that might be the way somebody, how someone believes, but if you don't know, best to avoid it. Anything that starts with at least you have other children, at least you had 60 good years. That can really minimize someone's experience and make them feel like they shouldn't feel the way they feel. So avoiding those statements. They lived a full, long life. They must have been a really great parent for you to be so upset. Again, that's making an assumption about your relationship. You need to be strong. Your family needs you to step up. A lot of times this is said to children. And I kind of thought that maybe as a society we had gotten away from that, but I hear from people all the time, grown men especially, who were told this or have recently been told this. And a kid's only job is to be a kid. They don't need extra pressure. You need to get on with life. And then also any dope statement. So any statement along the lines of don't feel guilty, don't feel mad, don't be jealous. Again, what that says is you are not a safe person for me to be honest with. And so we want to avoid those statements. All right, so on the flip side, here's some things that you might want to consider saying. I'm sorry you're hurting. I'm sorry this happened. And you'll notice none of these on this list are making assumptions about relationships, about anything like that. How is today for you? So this is the flip side of how are you? Narrowing it down. How is today for you? How's your Monday? How was your birthday? So instead of the general statement, narrowing it down. There's no right or wrong way to do this. Gosh, how validating is that, right? I don't know what to say, but I'm here to listen. Sometimes we just want someone to sit with us. We don't want them to talk, and we don't want to talk, but just having somebody with you in the same space, sometimes that's what we need. Sharing memories with them. If you have memories of the person, a lot of times the griever wants to hear those. And so that might be an opportunity for you to show support. Take all the time you need. Sometimes when people step in this space or even call us on the phone, the tears immediately start flowing. I think there's the anxiety of getting here or picking up the phone to call, and then knowing that they've come to the right place. They're here where people will support them and their grief is acknowledged. And so we're saying this to people all the time, like, take your time. It's okay. The tears are okay. You are loved, or I love you. What would be most helpful today? So today, what can I do for you? I was just thinking of you and I wanted to let you know. That goes a long way, and not even days and weeks after the loss, months, years. Like we said, grief doesn't end. So continuing to check in. And then those things, taking that minute or two, we think of people all the time during the day, right? Something reminds you of somebody, just taking a moment to reach out, or even at the end of the day, like, hey, this afternoon I was in my car and I heard this song and it reminded me of your dad. And I just wanted to let you know. Those things show support and care. There's also things that we can do to show support and care that aren't speaking, that aren't using words. So matching their energy. If you're with somebody and they're kind of closed in, maybe their head is down, you wouldn't come in and like be all animated and high voiced. You want to match their energy, right? That shows connection with somebody. Also with kids, this works really well. Reflecting what you hear. So sometimes we struggle with, like, I don't know how to respond to somebody if they're telling me that they're feeling guilty that their person died. So you can reflect back what you've heard them say. It sounds like today is a tough day for you. It sounds like you're really feeling some guilt right now. You're not trying to fix it, right? This is unfixable, but you're connecting with them and you're showing support. So again, saying things like, you're disappointed more people didn't show up, or you're worried about returning to work. Again, not solving it, not trying to fix it. You're acknowledging what they're sharing with you. Invalidation can sound like, oh, that makes so much sense. I hear you. Gosh, that sounds really tough. Huge one. These are normal reactions. You're not crazy. We typically, on average, see people probably for the first time, like 3 to 6 months after the loss. And usually what they come in with is, I don't think I'm doing this right. Nobody's checking in on me anymore. I feel like I should be in a different place. And that's kind of how grief support works, right? You're inundated with support in the days, weeks, maybe months after a loss. And then everybody goes back to their routines, right? And your world is still upside down. And so that sends a message to grievers that they should be in a different place, right? And don't even get me started on bereavement leave. The message that it sends to people that they get 5 days off after the death of a child or a spouse, that message is, you should be better and able to fully function and be as productive and be focused. And that's not how humans work, right? So all of these things can be hugely validating to somebody if you say, this is a really normal reaction. You are not losing your mind. you're right. It sounds like that was a frustrating experience. I wouldn't have liked that either. It's so unfair. So validating their feelings is a really, and I say easy, but easy in the sense of you're not trying to say the right thing. You're just reflecting back what they're telling you. So goes a long way. And then, we of course can express compassion and comfort in different ways. A hug, a shoulder pat, or a squeeze, even just like a communal sigh. When somebody tells you something big, you just kind of take a deep breath. That can be a way to communicate connection as well. A head nod, and again, being with someone in silence. So sometimes those are ways that you can support people as well. So I talked before about, as human beings, I think most of us are wired. We want to do something, right? That's why we bring casseroles and we offer to take people to appointments. We want to do something to help. Well, these are ways that you can help someone that's grieving. Write important dates on your calendar, make note of them, and then reach out as they're approaching or on the date. So, of course, Mother's Day is next month. So if you have somebody who might be struggling with that day, could be for a variety of reasons, you can reach out a couple days before or on the day and say, hey, I was just thinking of you. I am, we've talked before about how tough this day is for you, and I just wanted to let you know that I'm thinking of you. Use the deceased person's name. That goes along with not forgetting their person, right? So using their name. Offering to accompany them to social functions. Let them be your out. So like, hey, your work party's coming up. If you want to go, I'll go along for the ride, and then we can get out of there after 10 minutes if we need to, right? So offering to be their sidekick in those circumstances. Be specific about what you are willing to do. So as a society, we're really good at saying, let me know what you need. So that puts all of the burden on the griever, and nobody has time to make a list for good meaning people, right? So offer something specific, like, hey, I'm going to the grocery store. What can I pick up for you and drop off? Or it looks like it's going to snow this weekend. Can I send my kiddo over to shovel your driveway? Offer those specific things. That's going to be huge for people. If somebody does ask you to do something and you're not able to for whatever reason, offer something else. So for example, if I ask you to come help me pack up my dad's clothes, but you can't, maybe you could say, I can't do it today, but next weekend I'm free in the afternoon on Saturday. I can drive things to Goodwill, or I can help clean out the fridge, or whatever it is. So if you do need to say no, which of course sometimes we might need to, see if there's something else you could offer, just so it's not a no. Initiate the connection and giving them choice. I talked about that, rather than saying, if you need anything, let me know. Calling, sending an email or a text, letting them know you're thinking of them. And then research options for support. So if they're interested, someone might be interested in getting some therapy or finding out about support groups. And if you can do some of the legwork for them to find out what's available, when it is, what the cost is, if there's a wait list, that just takes something off their plate. So that might be a way that you can support someone who's grieving as well. Okay, so here's a test for our technology. This is a short video, and it's by Brene Brown. Not sure if anybody has heard of her work. So we love her in the grief world. And this is an illustration about how you can connect with someone and how the connection is what is helpful. So if anybody on Zoom land cannot hear this, please let me know, but I did share the sound, so hopefully we'll be good.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. Yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
All right. I love that visual of connecting with somebody in the place where they are. You know, you're not trying to talk them out of it. You're not trying to convince them that it's not that bad. You're just really acknowledging where they are and offering to be there with them. So I did talk a little bit, changing gears here. I did talk a little bit about the grief support that Agrace provides. We do offer, like I said, the individual support. We do have a Spanish-speaking, a bilingual staff person, so we're able to provide individual support in English and Spanish. The adult grief groups I spoke about, family, the resources, education. We also do a lot of work in area schools. We do school-based grief groups, and then also meet with kids individually in schools. So that's a large part of our time as well. And for those who aren't in the building, I have a short video that I'd love to show you. And if anyone is ever around in the Madison area and you want to see our space, please reach out. We love to show it.
Welcome to the Agrace Grief Support Center. We opened in 2017 with the goal of providing grief support to anyone in the community who is grieving a death. Our large meeting room is the space we use for our adult grief groups. This space is where we meet with people for individual grief support. Our smaller group room is an additional space for adult groups. Our family program is a program for school-aged children and their parents or caregivers, and each night before group we provide a meal to these families. This is our kitchen space where we share that meal before group begins. Each of our playrooms provides different materials for the kids to use as a way to express their grief. The first is the playroom, which is full of costumes and masks and puppets, dolls, and a home play area. The hospital room allows kids to play with hospital and medical equipment as a way to work through any questions or curiosities they might have. The quiet room includes a sand table, books, comfy seats, and a play tent. The art room allows kids to express themselves through a variety of art materials. Our tornado room is our space for large motor play and is a safe space for kids to move their bodies. In addition to being the space for our older kids, the teen room is also where we hold opening and closing circle with all of the kids on family program nights. The Agrace Grief Support Center offers individual, group, and family programs for anyone who is grieving a death. Please reach out for additional information at 608-327-7110 or agrace.org/grief support.
All right. So I'm going to stop sharing. And all right, are there any questions?
Yes, if anyone has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and you can ask Jessie directly. Otherwise, you can feel free to put it in the chat and I can moderate it, whatever you are most comfortable with.
I have a question, Jessie. I know you have outreach and offices in other counties and different areas. Do those say that is the new one at Oconomowoc in the Mohawk area there, or Stock or Baraboo, wherever you are up there? Do you also offer grief support in those facilities for people in outlying areas?
Good question. So Marianne was asking about our we have satellite offices in other counties. So our main buildings are here, the inpatient unit in Madison, and then we also have an inpatient unit in Janesville, so we can provide grief support there. This is the only grief center, so this is the only space for kids in particular, but we do have a satellite office in Oconomowoc, in Baraboo, in Dodgeville, and I feel like I'm missing one. We can do individual support there or group support, adult groups, in any of those locations. We can also do it virtually. So if somebody wants to meet with us via Zoom, we can do that as well. And technically we can support anyone in the United States virtually. So yeah, there's a couple of options.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I had one question and maybe you covered it, but I don't recall. Is there a fee or can you accept insurance? All of that, I guess.
Yes, good question. I did not cover that. So if the person who died was not a hospice patient in the last year, there is a fee. And if the person was never a hospice patient, there is a fee. Individual support is $35 a session, and that can be lowered or waived without any proof needed. So if somebody says, you know, I could really use individual support, I can't afford $35, no problem, let's get the ball rolling. We don't bill insurance, we don't bill people. If we mention the fees at initial contact, and if somebody brings us money, we take it. If they don't, we don't ask them about it. So it's really not a huge a barrier for folks. We want people to get quality grief support, regardless of their ability to pay. So, and I also wanted to mention, because I know, unfortunately, most places that provide therapy or counseling is often a very long wait list, and we don't have a wait list. We can usually see someone within a week or two. And we don't provide therapy in the sense of like diagnosing or treatment plans. We provide very specific grief support. but oftentimes people will come see us while they're on a wait list for more long-term support to at least get some grief support in the meantime. So that's an option.
Great. That was my next question about the wait list. And that is fantastic that you offer those services at such a discounted rate and then even for free if needed.
Yeah.
Any questions in the chat? Or you have one in your room?
Yep, we got a couple in here.
Can you address grief brain?
Grief brain? Sure. So I think a lot of things can show up when people are grieving, and their ability to focus and pay attention. Not remembering if they did something, not remembering if they made an appointment or sent an email is very common. And I think, and I'm not super familiar with, I know there's a lot of research out there on brain responses to grief. I can't speak super eloquently to it, but it is definitely a part of it. There is, I think, so much energy spent on just getting up and doing what you need to do to get through the day that your brain just doesn't have the capacity to think of all these details and remember things like that. So yes, it's a very real thing that we see people experience.
As a result.
Typically it does. Yes, typically it does. When we're talking with people about it, we try not to give timelines because everybody's so different, but typically it does. And for some people, it might be longer than they'd like that they're struggling with that. We had a person here for support who doesn't feel like she can even drive right now. And I think it's been maybe 2 months since her spouse died. So yeah, I mean, sometimes it can be really impactful to people's daily living. She just doesn't trust herself to be able to focus enough to drive safely. So yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Sean.
My follow-up question was, you mentioned the rate for individual session.
Mm-hmm.
What about like adult group session?
Sure. So the question was about the cost for groups. So our adult groups are, sometimes they're 6 weeks, sometimes they're 8 weeks. We're in a transition period of that, but they're $75 for the 6 or 8 week session. Currently, our family program is, there's no charge for that. I'm not sure if that will stay that way or if we will implement a fee for that. We do have a drop-in group. It's called Bridges. Some people, for a variety of reasons, aren't able to commit to a 6 or 8 week group. So we wanted to have an option for them. And so Bridges is $15. That's offered twice a month virtually and twice a month in person here at the Grief Center. Some people really benefit from grief support, and maybe they just need a session or two around an important time of year. So they'll come a few times to get that group support without the long-term commitment. So there's a couple of different group options. Mm-hmm. We do also try to, pay attention to what other organizations are offering as far as groups. And if there's a need that's not being met, we want to try to do that. So we have a young adult group going on right now. So the 18 to 30-ish year olds that kind of fell through the cracks of, they're not in school or, school age, and they're not necessarily appropriate for a group, a spouse partner loss group, for example. So we're offering that. We have done individuals whose person died from suicide. We, the past 2 summers, did a walking group. The Badger State Trail is right around the corner. So, for some people, taking a walk and doing like a side to side instead of a face-to-face conversation was more comfortable. So we really try to pay attention to what the needs are, and if there's gaps, try to offer that. So we have specialty groups that we offer periodically throughout the year as well.
Did you mention, Jesse, about when someone has a family member, loved one at Agrace,
Mm-hmm.
and or with the Agrace organization, and they pass? Didn't I read sometime that they have X amount of time they can come to the groups for free?
Yes, so for people whose loved ones died with hospice, there's no charge for any of our grief services for the first year after the death. So if they want to attend a group during that first year, there's no charge. The individual support, there's no charge. They can certainly attend after the year has passed. There will just be a fee associated with it if they can afford it. So.
Another question, do you ever have to deal with people, there's something called anticipatory grief. Do you deal with that at all? People that grieve before death?
Right. So the question was about anticipatory grief before a loss happens. So yes, that's definitely something that happens. So my team only provides individual support to people in the community not served by Agrace. And we strictly are post-death. So it gets a little complicated. So that's why I'm struggling. The people that are on hospice services, they have a spiritual and grief counselor assigned to them. So the Agrace Hospice patients, part of their team, they have the nurse, the social worker, the doctor, part of their team is a spiritual and grief counselor, and that person provides anticipatory grief support to family and friends, as well as support to the patient. So me and my team don't provide anticipatory grief support to the community. That's done by another team, but only for hospice patients. So yes, yeah, it gets a little tricky. Any others? All right.
I will let you all go and stop our recording so you can take the tour. I just want to really thank you, Jessie. I think this was a huge resource. If you would like, we would love to put it on our website under our resources page. I think it would be fantastic to be able to offer this to people within our organization. I think it would be greatly utilized. But I just wanted to thank everyone for attending today. I hope you all have a great walkthrough of the building, and I hope everyone has a wonderful day.
You as well.
Thanks, Ashley. Thanks, everyone.